Hello everyone. Hi, I hope you can hear me and see me. Hello to everybody who's joined. We're going to start quite promptly at 1 o'clock so we can get through everything today. Thank you for joining us for today's CYCJ webinar. My name is Charlotte Morris and I'm absolutely delighted to introduce you to Stuart Allardyce, who's going to present today. Stuart used to work with CYCJ, so we're always very happy to have a chance to welcome him back again. Stuart's got extensive expertise in the area of harmful sexual behaviour, having spent 20 years working as a social worker specialising in this. He's director of Stop It Now Scotland and vice chair of No to UK, and also co-author of Working with Children and Young People Who Have Displayed HSB. And he's also a CYCJ Associates, proving that nobody ever really leaves us at CYCJ. So without any further ado, I'm just going to hand over to Stuart. There will be a short opportunity for questions at the end. Please put these in the chat function and I'll share what I can within the parameters of time with Stuart. And I think maybe he'd be happy to answer some after that as well, perhaps by email. As always, we'll be sharing resources and links after this event to registered delegates. And finally, if you're commenting about this on Twitter, please use the hashtag CYCJ Associates. Thank you. Stuart.
Thanks, Charlotte, and it's absolutely terrific to be with you guys today. There's quite an intimidating number of people who are joining this webinar this afternoon, but I think actually that probably says something about how this particular theme hits a nerve for many childcare practitioners, and in particular those that work in child protection and youth justice contexts. So today what I'm going to be talking about is young people who get into trouble with online sexual behaviour, using this particular phrase, technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour. And I suppose what we'll try and cover over the next kind of 45 minutes or so is I'll say a little bit about kind of definitions and why this is a problem at the moment in the kind of childcare sector. I'll say a little bit about research in this area, but I'm also going to talk about an action research project that we've been running in Glasgow over the last 3 years, working with young people who have got into trouble with online sexual behaviour, and looking at some of the kind of learning from all of that. I'll also try and signpost you to quite a few different resources for working with young people who present with this kind of issue. You'll hopefully get the slides for this after this presentation, and almost all of the resources will be hyperlinked into the slides, so you should be able to get access to those resources quite easily. The last thing before I get started is probably inevitably I need to be talking about issues around sexual abuse today as part of this presentation, and for some individuals of course that might be triggering, so I just want to kind of give that kind of trigger warning initially. For those that have not come across Stop It Now Scotland before, we're a small child protection charity, part of the UK charity Lucy Faithfull Foundation, but Stop It Now Scotland is based in Edinburgh, but we cover the whole of Scotland, and we have 8 staff who come from backgrounds in social work, law enforcement, counselling, and we also have a full-time forensic psychologist within the team. And all of our work is around child sexual abuse prevention. And when I talk about child sexual abuse prevention with people, quite often people say, oh, does that mean you work in schools? We do some work in schools, but I think what people are meaning by that is traditionally when we think about preventing child sexual abuse before it happens, we think about working with children so that they know what abuse is, that if something makes them feel uncomfortable, if an adult or an adolescent is acting in a certain way towards them, that they could go and speak to a trusted adult. That kind of stuff is really important. It's a building block of prevention, but there are problems with it because usually the person who is abusing children is known to the child. And actually, it's also not the responsibility of children to stop themselves getting abused. It's the responsibility of adults. So actually our work starts with adults, and we work with those who present a risk of harm to children, trying to help individuals make better choices, and we work with individuals who are already protective toward children to become more protective in some way. So we work with people who are worried, adults who are worried about sexual thoughts and feelings towards children, who have not committed offences. We work with people in that space between arrest and conviction. We do some work with adolescents, which is in particular kind of my background before coming to Stop It Now Scotland. And then importantly, we take all the learning from everything we do and try and turn that into kind of resources that both professionals and the general public can use that actually indicate some of the practical things that we can do to actually prevent child sexual abuse in the first place. One aspect of child sexual abuse is technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour, perpetrated particularly by children and young people themselves. So let me give you a bit of a kind of context to that. You can see from this particular slide here, 1 in 3 internet users are under the age of 18 in the UK. In fact, actually, if you're a child or a young adult born since the year 2000, you won't have a memory of a world that was pre-internet, and it's highly likely that you've been brought up with smartphones. The average age that a child is given a smartphone in the UK, I'll pause there, think what number that might be, but actually the number is 10. The most common age for children getting a smartphone is 10 now in the UK. And actually, smartphone technology and kids being online has been an incredible thing for lockdown, because young people have managed to remain socially connected to their peers. They've used online environments for education, for entertainment. Scottish Government are giving tablets out to young people in schools because of this. And actually, I think new technologies are incredibly helpful for young people who, particularly in adolescence, where they're trying to find autonomy, independence, that developmental shift where you begin to move away from your parents in terms of your centre of interest and begin to move towards your friends and your pals and your peers being the kind of the most important things in your life. You can imagine how kind of new technologies are really kind of vital in all of this. If that stuff around autonomy in adolescence is an important part of young people growing up, another strand of adolescence, of course, is sexual development. Young people through adolescence go through puberty, go through physical changes. But if you think about your own kind of experience as a young person, you'll probably remember that, from age 10, 11, 12 onwards, that you may have started to have clearer sexual feelings, that you may have begin to kind of work out actually what you're sexually interested in, what you're not sexually interested in. Often young people will speak to friends and pals about film stars and musicians and what have you, just trying to kind of work out kind of what they're kind of interested in kind of sexually. And then from that, often the kind of next stages are about kind of sexual conversations and flirting and romantic relationships and indeed sexual activity. This is the arc that at least most young people, young adults are on in terms of the sexual development. Every aspect of what I've just described now has some kind of online element to it. And actually, that can be incredibly helpful insofar as, it's really positive that young people can go online and look at resources around kind of sexual health. So they're actually beginning to kind of make choices and do things where actually they might have been more too embarrassed to do in real life. But of course, what we also know about adolescence is that it's a time where young people are often not terribly emotionally regulated. They're very influenced by peers. Online environments themselves are very immediate and encourage quite disinhibited activity. So you can imagine that young people may also be making kind of mistakes when it comes to online sexual behaviour as well. And we can see that really clearly with this. I'm sure many of you will have seen the media coverage of the Everyone's Invited website over the last few weeks, which is a website where people have been putting victim survivor narratives in terms of things that they've experienced at either school or at college or university. And quite a lot of the thousands of narratives that are up on that website involve adolescent online behaviour. And it's probably wrong to talk about these as mistakes that young people are making online, because it minimises the seriousness of this. We're actually talking about behaviour that is abusive. So you can see these particular kind of quotes here. I'm not going to go through them all. But you can see people talking about receiving violent sexual images. You can see lots of stuff there about girls being made to watch pornography by boys. You know, stuff that's quite concerning in terms that we learn from kind of victim and survivor narratives. These case examples here, and this perhaps gives a different kind of slant on it, but these actually all came from some seminars that I and Ethel Quill ran for the CYCJ back in 2017, where we brought together practitioners and policymakers to talk about the subject of technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour. And we asked practitioners to share some kind of practice experiences. So here are some of the kind of situations that practitioners were talking about. Derek is 15, sends a nude photograph to his 15-year-old girlfriend, is intercepted by the girlfriend's parents, who report it to the police. In that particular case, then he was then diverted to do some work with a youth justice team. And in that particular situation, the youth justice colleagues were scratching their heads, trying to think about actually what should be the program of work that we do with this young man. Jack is 16, meets an older man online in a gay chat room. The man sends him sexual images of children and says that Jack is now in possession of child pornography, and asks him to send pictures of himself and indeed to get pictures of other children and young people. And then probably the most concerning example, Alan's 14, spends a lot of time online watching pornography, finds it difficult to speak to girls, starts sending sexual messages to girls, gets knocked back, and then decides that he's going to send sexual messages to a female cousin who's age 11 because he thinks he won't get knocked back there. So a kind of complex range of different kind of issues that practitioners were kind of identifying. So what's going on here? Let me give you a bit of kind of background information. The EU Kids Online survey, this is done every few years. It's not a UK survey. UK are not involved with this anymore. But the reason I've chosen this is that it involved 25,000 young people from 19 different countries, I think. So a very large data set. And you can see here that, you know, a small proportion of 12 to 14-year-olds and a larger proportion, about a third of 15 to 16-year-olds, say that they've received sexual messages online. Smaller numbers say that they have sent messages, but 25% of 15 to 16-year-olds said that they'd received unwanted sexual requests. And indeed, often though those requests are coming from peers rather than coming from adults. They do come from adults, but the majority seem to come from peers, actually. So we have this kind of background stuff that is going on that we learn from kind of research looking at kind of online behaviour for young people. But actually, we also know that schools are sometimes not doing everything that they could in this area. Young Scott survey in 2019 found that almost half of young people couldn't recall any kind of school input about posting sexual messages, receiving unwanted sexual requests, online sexual behaviour. A deep dive into criminal justice data done by the Criminal Justice Analytics team, the Scottish Government, back in 2017, I think, found that in terms of recorded sexual crime, where an individual had had a sexualized conversation with a child, which was then reported to the police, the average age of victim in those kind of situations, so these are online solicitation grooming situations, age of victim was 14 on average, but the age of perpetrator was age 18. If you want to put that in a school context, that would mean somebody in S6 having sexualized conversations online and that stuff were unwanted sexual requests with somebody who's an S3. And we also know that around a third of sexual abuse is probably perpetrated by children and young people themselves, something that we know from a few different studies, both in the UK and also in the United States. So if you bring all of that together, what does it tell you? I think what it tells you is that if you work in a school, if you work in a service, if you work in any context where you're engaging with young people, and this is not coming up as an issue, well, the data would suggest that it is going on in the background somewhere for many of the young people that you're working with. Something about kind of definitions here. The first technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour started to be used by NSPCC probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And they used this definition to describe this: one or more children engaging in sexual discussions or acts, using the internet and or image creating, sharing or communication devices, which is considered an inappropriate or harmful given the age and stage in development of the child. And the behaviour falls in a continuum of severity from viewing of pornography in inappropriate ways through to child sexual abuse. So it's a catch-all category describing a whole pile of things, from sexual harassment online, peer-to-peer sexual abuse online, non-consensual sharing of self-produced sexual images, stuff that we'll talk about in a minute in relation to sexting, viewing of illegal material online, and also kind of online solicitation, grooming and abuse of children online. Some of you might have come across this before: Simon Hackett's Continuum of Sexual Behaviour. I'm not going to go into detail on this, but the important thing about Simon's work here is that he talks about how children and young people at different ages have expected normative kind of sexual behaviour that we need to accept that young people are mostly involved with. Stuff that's often consensual, mutual, reciprocal, often in a context of kind of curiosity and exploration and learning about your own body and other people's bodies. And then there's behaviours that are perhaps inappropriate, that are probably done out of context, maybe socially acceptable within a particular peer group, but are probably inappropriate, but still has a kind of level of consensuality to them. Behaviours that are problematic in nature. So these tend to be behaviours that tend to be a little bit more persistent. Inappropriate behaviour tends to be kind of one-off stuff that is responded to and then the child or young person doesn't continue. Problematic stuff tends to be stuff that's a little bit more entrenched as a pattern, and then behaviour that is clearly abusive in nature. And what we see is behaviour that moves from probably being developmentally damaging for the young person themselves through to behaviour that may be damaging for the young person themselves, but will also be harmful to other people as well. If we take that and apply that to online behaviour, over here we would have, some kind of sexual interactions that are consensual between adolescents that we would expect to be happening as part of flirting, dating, romantic relationships, through to behaviour that might be inappropriate use of adult pornography. Perhaps the young person's too young to view the material, or perhaps they're viewing a large amount of quite disturbing material, through to stuff that's around kind of image sharing, that may be kind of risk-taking behaviour, viewing of illegal material, IIOC, indecent images of children, through to stuff around grooming and adult harassment and abuse. So we see a wide range of different materials. This comes from the AIM project. I wouldn't necessarily agree with where everything kind of sits on this continuum, but you can see that there's a shift from behaviour that is developmentally harmful to the child themselves to behaviour that also is directly harmful to other people. And we shouldn't underappreciate actually the level of harm that can happen through online interactions. Indeed, one of the things that we've learned from a number of studies really over the last kind of 3 or 4 years is that online sexual abuse experienced by young people, either perpetrated by an adult or perpetrated by a peer, can be just as damaging for victims and survivors as contact sexual abuse. And indeed, when the behaviour is image-based as well, then often what is happening for the victim survivor is that they know that their images are continue to be out there online, and therefore they have an experience of continually being abused because of what's happening. This quotation here, I just want to kind of bring this out. This is somebody on the Everyone's Invited website saying that they feel bad about kind of putting up their narrative because they haven't been raped. But they talk about how sexual abuse, new coercion, and harassment has become so normalised in society. And indeed, I think this kind of theme that actually we're now moving into a culture where there's kind of low-level harm that is often occurring for young people, often image-based in nature, and how that actually kind of sets the bar for what young people consider to be abusive and not abusive is one that we need to consider very, very seriously. I think one of the things that's really striking about Everyone's Invited is the way that actually it's pointing to how attitudes and values are really important with young people in terms of either promoting healthy behaviour or indeed how young people justify what may be harmful behaviour. Let me say a few things about what research tells us generally about young people involved with these kind of behaviours. First of all, the research is still very limited and scattered across a wide range of different literatures, kind of literatures about kind of technology and online behaviour, cyber psychology, journals, academic papers in the sexual violence field, child development papers. So it's actually quite difficult to get a kind of overview of what's going on in the literature. But some of the things that we are learning is that technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour does reflect stuff around sexist attitudes and stuff around values and attitudes in society, and indeed online peer cultures. The few studies that have looked at young people who have viewed illegal images of children and then compared those to those who would be involved with contact abuse of behaviours have found that actually kids involved with online behaviours often have less experiences of abuse and maltreatment in their own backgrounds. They're often doing better educationally than kids that are involved with contact harmful sexual behaviour, but also the kind of persistence of kind of online behaviours, the recidivism rates seem to be quite low. Some early suggestions that actually this behaviour might have more affinities with harassment and bullying than what we generally understand around kind of contact harmful sexual behaviour. And also Hollis and Belton, who did a really great study for NSPCC, looked at kids involved with online harmful sexual behaviour and those with offline harmful sexual behaviour, and was surprised to find that actually sometimes the responses of systems and legal responses were more serious for those involved with online behaviour than with contact behaviour. What they speculate is that might be because we generally get anxious around young people's sexual behaviour as professionals anyway, and when you link that to the anxieties we have about kids being online, it becomes a bit of a moral panic. So the argument from that particular study is actually, can we ensure that we have kind of proportionate responses to these kind of things? Let me say a little bit about Rosa, which is a project we started in Glasgow 3 years ago, funded by the R.S. MacDonald Trust. And over the last 3 years, we've worked with 60 young people who have got into trouble with online sexual behaviour. We've offered those young people a one-to-one psychoeducational programme, which runs to kind of 6 to 10 weeks. We've been offering that online over the last year to a range of young people. But also, although we've been working with young people who are getting into trouble with this behaviour, generally referred in by schools or police or social work, we've also then been taking the learning from working with those young people and trying to share that with a steering group of young people at Shawlands Academy in Glasgow, and asking young people to come up with some ideas about actually what should prevention look like then? What are the kind of things that we need to be doing more of, or doing differently to make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't continue and indeed grow. So they've helped us develop some parenting workshops. They've helped us develop some UPSE materials that look at consent and online behaviour, and also we developed an anonymised reporting system so young people could actually get help by emailing us, but we never actually find out who they are. And we've had some kind of interesting findings from that. The CYCJ is evaluating the project, and the evaluation will hopefully be published in November of this year. Let me say something about the kind of key messages from this project so far. One is that in working with young people at Shawlands, but also kind of more generally, it's clear that young people are saying to us in this project that sharing sexual images, often in the context of kind of flirting and dating and romantic relationships, is something that's fairly commonplace in adolescence now. This does sit well with what we know with other data, and actually young people are telling us that they feel that adults should be less concerned about this than perhaps we are. And young people do recognise that there are some risks in all of this, but because those images that are self-produced and then shared with a partner or what have you, because they are technically illegal images of children, young people are telling us actually the fact that these are classified as illegal images akin to what society would describe as child pornography is wrong. That we need to accept that young people are flirting and dating in quite a visually orientated online environment. Young people were saying to us that viewing online pornography is commonplace, probably from S1 onwards, and indeed young people are often talking about viewing pornography even in primary school, although young people saying to us that they felt that that was in hindsight inappropriate. But recognizing that many young people do look at online pornography for a range of different reasons, including trying to learn about sex and adolescence. It's probably a terrible place to learn about sex and adolescence, but indeed young people weren't really given many opportunities to think about that in school contexts. Online problematic behaviour, sexual problematic behaviour may be connected to vulnerabilities, but not always. We found quite a few young people with additional support needs that we've worked with over the last year, particularly young people affected by autism, but also lots of young people who didn't come from kind of backgrounds of adversity as well. So recognising kind of vulnerability is a factor there, but not for everyone. We also found that adults are struggling to identify concrete things that could be done to promote safety. One thing that's come up in our work is young people talking about going to a teacher and saying that a peer has sent them an image that made them feel uncomfortable. And then a teacher saying, well, why don't you block that person then and report the image? Rather than actually an adult saying, okay, what was the image and how did it make you feel and what would you like done about this now? So something that has a bit more of a kind of child protection framework and a preventative framework, because the problem is if that young person blocks the other young person in terms of online engagement, and then what will probably happen is the person who sent the image will just send images to other kids and will probably look for children who are more vulnerable. Young people don't know where to get help, online or offline, if they feel out of their depth in terms of online sexual behaviour. Separating young people into perpetrators and victims is problematic. One of the things that we've found in our work is young people who are getting into trouble online have often had experiences that we as adults would describe as them being exploited online, but they often don't conceptualise that in some way. In the kind of way that we would. They would put it down as a kind of banter or something of that nature. But it's clearly something that has shifted their boundaries and their understanding of what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. Young people have generally told us that they lack an understanding of the law in relation to online sexual images and also an understanding of what consent means online. So clearly there's more that we need to be doing in school contexts here. Quite a few of the cases we've been involved with where young people have been charged in relation to sharing self-produced sexual images in non-consensual contexts. So guy sending a set of sexual images to his pals of his ex-girlfriend, which is something we've seen in several cases. Often these are related to things around breakups. We need to kind of think carefully about that. And finally, kind of educational and psychoeducational work seems to be effective. The program that we were doing with young people, although there are some issues about kind of fit with certain young people, it does seem to be the case that actually we can work with young people who are getting into trouble with these kind of behaviours, and we can nudge them in the right direction. Let me connect this to, so I'm just looking at the time here. Let me connect this to some things that are kind of general themes in the literature. So I'm going to talk about sexting. I'm going to talk about technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour and pornography. Holly, I wonder whether you could share the video around sexting that we planned.
Yep, let's get that up.
Hi, I'm Anne. I'm mum to Harry, who's 15, and Lucy, who's 13. When I found out that my baby, Harry, had shared a nude selfie, I was so shocked and horrified. I could have screamed there and then, but I didn't. I called his dad and we screamed amongst ourselves instead. Which, to be honest, was a blessing, because then when we spoke to Harry, I was a lot calmer. I was still angry on the inside, but the initial shock had worn off, so I could talk to him about it. Of course, he was so embarrassed, but once he opened up a bit, what surprised me was that he didn't seem to think it was that big a deal. The impression I got was it's just a thing that kids do, a part of growing up, a kind of flirting. Sometimes it was just fun, a joke even. Apparently, there are a lot of different reasons that teenagers send these pictures. I would have thought that if they're sharing nude pictures, it means that they've started having sex, but it doesn't necessarily even mean that. But in my day, my parents were shocked and horrified when I wore a short skirt and too much makeup. Things have moved on. Everything happens online now, but maybe kids' motivations haven't changed. I wasn't wearing a short skirt because I wanted to have sex or I wanted to be in a relationship. I did it to feel good about myself, and well, it's a bit like getting a load of likes on your Facebook page. Do you know one of the most worrying things I heard recently was that my friend's child hadn't gone to her parents for help after a naked picture of her was shared because she didn't think they knew enough about it, or even about the online world to be able to help. I know times have changed, that things are going to be different to when we were young, but teenagers are still teenagers. They're still taking risks, still pushing boundaries, and I can relate to that. It's the fact that so much of this happens online that I knew we needed to be more aware and open about it so that our kids, if they needed to, would come to us for help.
Holly, do I need to share my screen again?
Yeah, I think you will need to.
Okay, let me just try and do that. Is that working okay?
Yep.
Just go to slideshow. That particular video developed by CEOPS, a National Crime Agency, but actually it's built on some research that took place in Scotland that interviewed young people who had been involved with this kind of behaviour and how they wanted adults, looked at how they wanted adults to respond to this kind of stuff, and also involved with engaging parents as well, which is why I think that video, which is one of 4 videos actually in that series, provides a really measured response to this, which sits well with what we're learning about the literature. I mean, first of all, young people don't use the phrase sexting. Indeed, an NSPCC study a few years ago interviewed young people on the subject of sexting, and then they found at the end of the study that the majority of young people had misunderstood what was meant by that term, because they assumed that what adults were meaning was sending a text that had some sexual content. They didn't think that adults were asking about the sharing of pictures in any way, because young people will normally talk about sharing nudes or sharing pics or things of that nature. the other thing that the video kind of sits well with is that when research started being done about kind of adolescent kind of behaviour around sharing self-produced sexual images, I think what some of the original kind of articles and studies looked at it from a very legal point of view, kind of noting that these images are illegal in nature, because even though they've been produced by the young person themselves, they are a sexualized image of a child. But actually what we've had over the last few years is many studies now that are interviewing young people about their experience of being involved with this kind of behavior. And indeed, many young people talking about coercion and force and pressure to do this kind of stuff. So let's not underestimate that's an issue. And indeed, young people talking about non-consensual sharing as well. But also many young people saying, actually, this is something that we do in the context of relationships. So this diagram that you can see on the right comes from a study by David Finkelhor and Janice Wolak a few years ago, where they looked at 500 cases in the states of in the US where involving this kind of behaviour, and you can see they tried to separate things into stuff that's aggravated and stuff that's experimental. So aggravated, where adults tried to get images of young people, or young people tried to get images of other young people, and then use them in a reckless way or use them with intent to harm. And then what we see is kind of behaviour that's more experimental, which might be romantic, but also might be sexual attention seeking. So the important things in terms of our responses to this issue is to pay attention to issues around coercion, power difference, and non-consensual sharing. I'm not going to say much about dating and technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour, apart from the fact that this is quite a new area in the literature, but I think it's one that we need to pay attention to. Indeed, there's one study from 2018 that said that almost 3/4 of adolescents interviewed who'd been involved with dating which had an online element to it. And of course, we know that there are adolescent dating apps, but also that adolescents use adult apps as well around dating. But almost 3/4 had described some kind of harmful experience, which looks like this kind of stuff: sending of insults, threats, humiliation, non-consensual sharing of images, sexual pressure, monitoring messages and whereabouts, demanding passwords. And indeed, you can see at the bottom here that a quite recent article by Reed talks about digital monitoring and control, digital direct aggression, and digital sexual abuse being kind of key themes here. So I don't think we're talking very much with adolescents and indeed older adolescents about dating and online elements of that, but what we're discovering from the kind of research is lots of concerns in this area, and that certainly squares with some of the things that we've been learning from the Rosa project. And then let's talk a little bit about pornography, but before we do that, Holly, can you share the second video?
Yeah, let's get that up.
Which I promise is not explicit in nature.
Hiya, I'm Sue. This is Derek. We're here because your son just looked us up online, to watch us.
Matt, darling, there's some people here to see you. So he watches you online?
Yeah, on his laptop.
iPad, PlayStation.
His phone, your phone.
Smart TV, projector.
Yeah, anyway, we usually perform for adults, but your son's just a kid. He might not know how relationships actually work. We don't even talk about consent, do we? Now we just get straight to it.
Yeah, and I'd never act like that in real life.
Nah. Hey, Maddie. You right?
Okay, Sandra, stay calm. You know what to do here. All right, Maddie. It sounds like it's time to have a talk about the difference between what you see online and real-life relationships. No judgment.
Many young Kiwis are using porn to learn about sex. Keep it real online. Get help and advice at keepitrealonline.govt.nz.
Great. Let me just try and share my screen again. And here we go. I love that video. I think it came from New Zealand a couple of years ago. And what I like about it is that I think it's about helping parents find some kind of measured and proportionate response to this, because actually the majority of young people will have seen pornography, certainly by the age of 14. And indeed, that may be because they've actively sought it out. It may be because they've been sent something by a peer. It may be because they find something inadvertent online. And indeed, what we find in a lot of mainstream porn websites is not the kind of material that we as children and young people might have inadvertently found as adolescents, because we're often now seeing kind of images that are around sexual violence in mainstream pornography websites, certainly materials that is very hardcore, and indeed materials that increasingly have quite deviant themes, such as pseudo-incest videos. So we need to recognise that pornography looks very different from what it did perhaps 20 years ago. It's certainly pornography is a terrible place for young people to learn about what relationships look like, what consent looks like, what bodies look like. So there are lots of issues that we need to tease out with young people about this. Often young people are looking for these kind of materials out of curiosity and to learn about sexual things. And there are some links with stuff on harmful sexual behaviour, but the problem is that we really don't know enough about the kind of connections. So increasingly in working with young people who are involved with online harmful sexual behaviour, or indeed with contact harmful sexual behaviour, accessing kind of pornography is a theme. But the problem is that we don't know how pornography impacts adolescent sexual development, and indeed what the kind of timings are in context and particular kinds of kind of material and issues around exposure that seem to really kind of contribute to stuff around harmful sexual behaviour. So a complicated area, but it's clearly an area we need to be talking to young people more as teachers, as social workers, and indeed as parents. Last kind of slide, just about kind of general stuff from research and literature. It's probably worthwhile saying that this is such a new issue, and an issue that keeps on changing quite quickly. We don't have kind of agreed assessment protocols and kind of intervention methods. There are some things kind of gathering in terms of kind of evidence about what seems to work. You can see from this particular literature review from Rihanna Lewis in 2018. She talks about education about online safety, awareness of online consequences of behaviours, victim empathy, self-compassion, relapse prevention. These are the kind of things that we've included in the programme that we've been trialling in Glasgow. I think there's a danger of over-treatment of young people. What we found in our work in Glasgow is that there are some young people where a 6 to 10 week one-to-one program is perfect. Actually, there are some young people who probably didn't need that. They wouldn't have continued with the behaviour anyway. It was very much the kind of one-off, and they learned from that. But also, there are some young people actually where a kind of higher level of support is needed as well. So maybe dangers of over and under treatment here. And also, finally, just to say that although we have little in the adolescent literature yet, it's probably worthwhile saying that if you look at the adult literature around people involved with online sexual offending, what that tells us is that the adults we should be most concerned about in terms of recidivism tend to be those that are involved with other kinds of offending behaviour, or there are particular issues around sexual preoccupation and atypical sexual interests. And although we don't have the evidence yet, I would suggest that probably looks like it's going to be true around our work with adolescents as well. That there are young people who make mistakes, and we need to respond appropriately to that. And there are some young people who are involved with far more kind of driven material, driven kind of behaviour as well. And we should really be trying to kind of target those where there are overlapping issues around other kinds of offending, emotional dysregulation, and perhaps stuff around atypical sexual interests. I'm not going to say much about this slide apart from saying there are loads of resources online that are really useful in terms of videos and materials you can use in working with young people. This website, Bish, I think is a terrific website for young people themselves. written by those working in the sexual health field, giving advice to young people on particular themes. So young people can write into the website and then anonymously, and then their question is put up online, and then experts kind of answer it. There are just loads of things that I think that we could be sharing with young people, both in kind of direct work that we do, but also in kind of educational settings as well. So loads of stuff online that's helpful. A few final thoughts about prevention, and then I'll point you to a few other resources. Most of this comes from a terrific article by David Finkelhor that came out in 2020, which looked at different kinds of online harm and what literature is telling us at the moment about how we should be preventing these different kinds of online harm. So one of the things that he says is that when we are talking about stuff around online safety with young people, we should be careful about overemphasizing stranger danger messages, because actually, usually young people get into trouble with other individuals online. They're exploited by other people online that they think have started a relationship with them in some way. That's what grooming is. So actually trying to emphasize something around stranger danger will mean that young people will think, but I already know this individual. I've met him and he's told loads of things about himself, so he's not a stranger to me. So the stranger danger message is probably ineffective. One of the things that David Finkelhor suggests, which I think is a really kind of beautiful statement, actually, really helpful, is that actually the issues around online safety are in effect usually about online consent and what exploitation looks like online. And we're already doing lots of work with kids about what consent is and what child sex exploitation is offline. And we need to connect those conversations together. But somehow we see the question of internet safety as a separate one, a different module, rather than talking with kids about consent and then having a discussion about what does that mean in terms of online contexts. In terms of the stuff around sexting, sending nudes, one of the things that Finkelhor has pointed out is that the more we say to young people, don't do this, when they do it and things get out of hand, they won't go to adults for help, because they will expect adults to say, oh, why did you do that? Because we told you not to do it. So we need a much more nuanced way that doesn't end up victim blaming, because what we want is to have a situation where a 13-year-old girl or boy can go to a teacher and say, look, I sent an image of myself to my boyfriend or girlfriend yesterday, and actually I'm really regretting that now, and what can I do about that? We need to create those spaces where young people can reach out for help in some way, which is why we need to really have a discussion of these kinds of issues within the context of young people's rights to make choices, models of consent, and also how young people can seek help from adults. I think sometimes when teachers and other professionals speak to young people about pornography, there can often be stuff around kind of values that we have, quite rightly, that kind of get in the way. And one of the things that Finkelhor points out is that let's not get too caught up about sex positivity and sex negativity and all of this, because actually young people will have a wide range of views about things like pornography or sending images. And what we need to do is help young people with their critical thinking skills and actually how they ethically want to engage with other young people. Our messaging around prevention needs to recognise diversity, and also there's a place for kind of bystander interventions in all of this. And I would mention in a Scottish context, we have Mentors for Violence Prevention. Certainly we're doing a bit of work with Community Justice Scotland, making sure that MVP programmes are really kind of fit for purpose with respect to kind of online behaviours. Last slides, I just want to say some things about what we do next in terms of Rosa. Because that 3-year project is coming to an end. Hopefully when we have the kind of full findings from the Rosa project in Glasgow, we will share that as a document, and our plan is to run an online conference about the learning from that project in November of this year. the program that we've been using with young people, we're trying to kind of lock in some funding models at the moment to allow other young people across Scotland to be able to access that. So look out for an announcement about that over the next kind of couple of months. We also are very keen to train professionals and being able to deliver that program themselves, and indeed we're looking at doing some training in Glasgow next month, training up professionals. So there should be training being made available across Scotland kind of later this year. We're doing a bit of work with Education Scotland, developing on the back of Rosa a training package for teaching teachers about identifying and responding to technology-assisted harmful sexual behaviour. That will hopefully be rolled out across schools in the next academic year. We have some other stuff that's kind of kicking around developing a young people's website and scaling up school prevention work, but we're not there yet. Loads of resources that are out there. I'm not going to go into these in any detail because I'm running out of time, but you can kind of click on these, and the one I would want to kind of point out is the RHSP toolkit. Is a fantastic resource if you're working with young people in this area, and including young people with learning disabilities and additional support needs. Loads of great stuff for working with young people there. We have some resources as well. We have a resource for parents who are worried because of their children's online sexual behaviour. We have a resource for parents about internet safety, and we also have a resource for parents and professionals about preventing harmful sexual behaviour in adolescents. All of those are on our website. If you get this presentation, you can just click on that link and you'll be taken directly to those resources. I mean, just to finish off, I think the final line I would say is that most young people don't get into trouble in this area. Most young people make very responsible, healthy choices in terms of sexual development online and off. But some people do make mistakes, and some young people do act in abusive ways. But the important thing to recognise is that actually all of that stuff is preventable. There are things that we're learning that can prevent young people getting into trouble here, but also actually for those young people who have acted in that way, there are things that we can do that generally seems to help those individuals not persisting with that behaviour in the future. And on that point, I'll just stop. Charlotte, I don't know if you're there.
Hello. Okay.
Hiya.
Thank you very much, Stuart. That was a fantastic, really interesting talk. Lots to think about, lots to unpack there. So again, brilliant. And we'll be sharing the resources, as I say, online from this. I'm just seeing there's any questions. I'm not seeing any questions come up. So if anybody wants to put any questions to Stuart, now would be a good time. Oh, hello, somebody there. Okay. So Stuart, I'll just read this out for you. I work with care experienced young people who tend to be scrutinised by adults more, and if they misuse online activity, adults tend to limit or stop online use. I worry we're not supporting them enough to learn to be digitally safe. What support can we give this group of young people so they are fairly responded to around this issue? Did you get all that?
Yes, I did. Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because clearly young people who are care experienced do have more adults in their lives, and you're right, they have a higher level of being monitored and supervised, which means that when they get into trouble in this area, then we often can react in certain ways. I think there's a number of different bits to this. I mean, I think, you know, the stuff that we've been talking about, having conversations with young people about, you know, healthy online and offline behaviours, awkward as that is, conversations about pornography, conversations about sharing of online images. We should be doing these things. And I think there are ways of doing it in sensitive ways with young people. I also think that the thing about taking digital devices away from young people, you're right, it disempowers them, but also I think there are some significant children's rights issues here. Actually, if you're an adult and commit an online sexual offence, although the police will take all your digital equipment away, there's nothing stopping you going out and buying more equipment. And it's very rare that you have a bail restriction stopping people going online, because it's generally deemed that actually adults have a right to be online. But we seem to take a much more intrusive kind of position with respect to young people. I think we need to reconsider that. And also, one of the things that I think we've learned from the Rosa work with young people is that many young people are saying to us, what would have been a really helpful message from adults at an early stage is, look, you know, if something happens and, you know, you feel out of your depth online, you know, come and speak to us, and we will do everything that we can to make sure things are safe, and we will try and do that in a way that doesn't involve taking you offline. That might not always be possible, but we will try and do that, because it's about getting that kind of balance between kind of safety, but also making sure that young people continue to be kind of engaged in online spaces in safe ways.
Okay, thank you very much, Stuart. The next question is, how do I find out more information around the training for professionals?
I forgot to mention this, but right at the start of the slides, my email address is there. So if you want kind of more information about that, just drop me a line. And indeed, if people have, you know, particular kind of cases that they want to kind of discuss in an anonymized way, I'm quite happy to, I'm receptive to hear what people's kind of experiences are.
Thank you. And as I say, in the email that we send out to delegates after this, Stuart's email address will be included in that. Next question, do you think children and young people not engaging in school are more at risk of experiencing harmful sexual behaviour online? That's a good one.
It is a good one, and obviously has some resonance with respect to where we've been in terms of lockdown. I mean, obviously that has some bearing on young children and young people who are homeschooled as well. What we know from lockdown is that recorded online sexual crime has gone up around kind of 20% since the start of lockdown. That's not just behaviour displayed by young people, but also victimization of children and young people by adults, and also adults that are involved with viewing indecent images of children. But I mean, it certainly seems to be the case that there has been a rise in online harm that has occurred during lockdown. That's worth kind of paying attention to. And the other thing, of course, is that when schools went back originally in August, September last year, hope I've got the dates right, what we saw was quite a significant rise in IRDs across Scotland, not just in relation to stuff around sexual abuse, but a whole wide range of kind of forms of maltreatment. But obviously what that was about was that young people were often separated from supportive adults out with the family home during lockdown. So I think it's those kind of two factors together which would lead me to conclude, yeah, I think there are vulnerabilities for young people who are not in school. Thanks,
Stuart. I think we've got time for one more. This is I'm just picking this one here. I have been asked by a young person for an alternative to online pornography. What would you advise? So yes, that was quite an interesting one.
So can you repeat that?
Yes, of course. I have been asked by a young person for an alternative to online pornography. What would you advise? That's all we've got. I don't know if the person who's asked that question maybe wants to elaborate a bit. So is that... I'll tell you what, until we've got that, Stuart, I'll just put this one to you. Will the education training package be delivered by teachers?
Yes, it will be. The idea is that the training will be provided to probably provided by Education Scotland to child protection leads in schools, pastoral care teams, and probably campus cops as well if you have one attached to your school. So that's the kind of model that they're talking about in terms of delivery.
Okay.
And then it can be cascaded to other teachers within the school. I'm just thinking about the stuff around pornography. Oh, that's a difficult question to answer, isn't it?
Sorry.
And you know, I mean, there are some debates in the pornography field about ethical pornography. You know, pornography that has been developed where it's very clear that there hasn't been harm caused to anyone. But I would take a step back and look at what is sitting behind that question. We maybe need to have a bit more of a conversation about that. But it sounds like, you know, that's a young person who is asking about, you know, what they do with sexual feelings and what kind of materials is it okay to engage with and not engage with. And I think sometimes we become a little bit too prescriptive about just trying to find a simple answer to some of these things, because actually the answers will emerge in the context of a conversation, particularly if we begin to listen to, you know, what sits behind the words here and what are the kind of motivations and the kind of drivers here. So I would resist trying to find a kind of simple answer which says, why don't you look at this website instead? Because if a young person is saying to you, okay, I'm sexually curious and I want to learn about sexual things and I want to work out what turns me on and what doesn't turn me on, then there are alternatives to pornography, and there are alternatives to online environments as well. But it's a complicated kind of conversation, but a conversation that sounds very necessary. Okay,
thank you, Stuart. I know we're just finishing at 2 o'clock, but I've just got another question I thought might be useful if you've got a short answer. Where would practitioners in Glasgow access the Rosa training? Very interested in this.
Yeah, so and I don't think we haven't advertised it in Glasgow yet, and we haven't identified who's going to be targeted at. So if that person wants to send me a quick email, I can make sure that the name is they receive the kind of mail shot about that.
Fantastic. Oh, okay, I think we'll leave it there. Holly, do you want to put my video? Am I okay to put my video on? So, okay, thank you. Right, well, I think that just remains for me to thank Stuart again. As always, incredibly informative and interesting. We'll definitely have you back again. To everybody else, as I say, I'll be sending the email out, and if Stuart's okay, I'll put his email address in there so questions can be addressed to him, because I see we have a lot of very interesting looking questions and I'm sorry we can't get through them all. Also as well, as I say, we'll be sharing the slides from this, we'll be sharing the video. We don't have an evaluation feedback form for these events because we're trying to sort of make them as quick as possible, really informal. But if you do have some remarks on how you found this event, how useful it was to your practice and your training and development, please do send them to cycj@strath.ac.uk, because it would be much appreciated for us, especially to inform future events. So thank you, Stuart. Thanks for your time, and thanks to my colleague Holly for making sure this runs smoothly. And thank you, everybody, for attending.